This was never supposed to happen to me. I want you to hear that clearly before I tell you anything else. But the truth is, I had seen something coming for a long time. I just didn't know what it was. I didn't know it had a name. I didn't know it had already been living inside me, quietly, patiently, like something waiting for the right moment to introduce itself. My name is Daniel Hargrove. I was 43 years old when the world as I knew it ended. And I was 43 years old when something I still cannot fully explain began. I'll start from the beginning, because that's the only way this makes any sense. My life wasn't complicated. I don't say that to diminish it. I loved my life. I had a daughter named Clara, who was 11 at the time and already smarter than I would ever be. And I had a routine that felt solid under my feet. My wife, Renata, and I had been married for 14 years. She had this way of laughing, loud, unguarded, completely unself-conscious, that I fell in love with before I ever fell in love with her face. That was my life. Ordinary in the most beautiful way. The headache started the previous November. At first, I thought it was stress. End-of-year pressure at work, a few bad nights of sleep. Maybe I needed new glasses. The pain would come in waves. Not a sharp stabbing kind of pain, but something deeper. A pressure behind my left eye that felt like something being slowly squeezed. I took ibuprofen. I drank more water. I bought blackout curtains for the bedroom. I did everything a reasonable person does when they're convinced something is manageable. He was the kind of doctor who listened with his whole body, leaning forward, nodding, writing things down in a handwriting so bad I always wondered if it was intentional. He ordered a basic MRI. He told me it was probably nothing. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot of my office for 10 minutes after hanging up. I didn't tell Renata right away. I don't know why. I think I was trying to protect some last thin layer of normal before it disappeared. I went to Dr. Ellison's office on Friday morning. He had a colleague with him, a man named Dr. Vasquez, a neurologist, who had driven up from Pittsburgh. They both stood when I walked in. I knew before either of them said a single word. What they found was a high-grade glioma, a tumor located in the left temporal lobe near the language and memory centers of my brain. It was roughly the size of a golf ball. He explained that radiation and chemotherapy could slow progression. He explained survival statistics in the careful, measured way doctors do when they're trying to be honest without being cruel. I heard all of it. I processed almost none of it. I stared at that lighthouse for a long time while the two men across the desk from me continued to speak. I remember thinking that someone had chosen that image very deliberately. Someone had thought, people will be getting bad news in this room. They will need something to look at. Let's give them a lighthouse. The average survival time with treatment was 14 to 18 months. I was 43 years old. Clara was 11. Renata still laughed like no one was watching. And somehow I had to go home and find the words. I won't describe that evening in detail. Some things are too private even for a story like this. This small, serious girl who still slept with a stuffed rabbit named Professor, and she said, "Okay, Dad, we're going to figure this out." She was 11 years old, and she said, "We're going to figure this out." I started treatment in April. The facility was 40 minutes from our house, so every morning I would drive the same route through the same countryside, past the same farms and the same gas station with the broken E on its sign that had been broken for as long as I could remember. I'd sit in a waiting room with other people going through their own versions of this. There was a woman named Betty who always brought knitting. There was a retired firefighter named Marcus who told terrible jokes and laughed at them himself. There's a kind of understanding in those waiting rooms that doesn't require language. The fatigue from radiation was unlike anything I had experienced. It wasn't tiredness. It was something geological, something that went down to the bone. There were days I couldn't make it from the car to the couch without stopping to rest. There were days I slept 16 hours and woke up exhausted. Renata took leave from her job without telling me until it was done. She just handled it. That's who she is. Chemotherapy followed in parallel. Keep going. I'm here. Keep going. 4 months into treatment, Dr. Vasquez ordered new imaging. I want you to understand what I was expecting going into that appointment. I had read everything. I had asked every question. I had made my peace, or was trying to make my peace, with a version of the future that didn't extend as far as I had planned. I had started having quiet conversations with Renata about practical things that no couple in their early 40s should have to discuss. I was not in denial. I was not surrendering. I was trying to live as fully as possible while preparing for what I believed was coming. The new scan showed that the tumor had grown. Not dramatically, Dr. Vasquez was careful to say that, but it had grown. The treatment was slowing it, not stopping it. He adjusted the protocol. He mentioned a clinical trial in Philadelphia that I might be eligible for. He said the words palliative care for the first time gently, the way you might set something fragile on a table. I drove home alone that day. Renata had offered to come, and I had told her not to, and now I was regretting that, but I was also somehow grateful for the 40 minutes of empty highway and gray October sky. I pulled over once into the parking lot of a closed farm stand. What I felt now was something quieter and heavier, something like grief for the future. Grief for the years I wasn't going to have, for the version of Clara I wasn't going to see, for the life Renata was going to have to build without me. I sat in that parking lot until the light changed. Then I drove home. What I'm about to tell you now is the part I've thought about the most, the part I've turned over in my mind more times than I can count, trying to understand it, trying to explain it, and eventually accepting that I simply cannot. It started with a conversation I had with my father. My father's name is Robert Hargrove, the kind of man who shows love through action, who fixes things without being asked, who shows up without announcing it. We had always had the kind of relationship where we understood each other without saying much. He had driven up from Allentown every weekend since my diagnosis without ever once making it feel like a burden. The weather had turned and there was wood smoke in the air from somewhere nearby. Without looking at me, "Is there anything you want? Anything at all? You just say it." The lake I meant was a small body of water in the Poconos, maybe 90 miles from where we grew up. We had gone there every summer when I was a child, my father, my mother, my younger sister Donna, and me. A rented cabin for 1 week in August. The same cabin every year, a place called Huron Point. We would swim and fish and play cards and do nothing in particular. The cabin probably didn't even exist anymore. But my father said, "Okay," and 3 weeks later he made it happen. He found Huron Point. It still existed. Same owners, a family named Brower, who had been renting the cabin since 1971. Same dock, same canoe. I need to describe the moment I saw the lake because I can't skip over it. We came around the last bend in the access road, and the trees opened up, and there it was, still and silver in the November light, the opposite shore maybe half a mile away, framed by bare-limbed trees and a pale sky. I had been so tired lately that most things felt muted far away behind glass. But something happened when I saw that water. Something in my chest opened. I can't name it more precisely than that. It opened. We stayed 3 nights. I slept better than I had in months. Renata would sometimes sit beside me, or sometimes leave me alone with the quiet, and she always seemed to know which I needed. On the second night, we built a fire in the cabin's stone fireplace. My father looked at me across the room and said, "You look better." I said, "I feel better," and I meant it. In a way I couldn't quantify or justify, in a way that had nothing to do with the tumor or the treatment or the statistics. I felt better. We drove home on Sunday. On Monday, I called Dr. Vasquez's office to discuss the clinical trial in Philadelphia. His assistant scheduled an intake evaluation for the following Thursday. I told Renata that evening over dinner, and she reached across the table and squeezed my hand without saying anything. The evaluation in Philadelphia involved a full-day series of assessments, neurological tests, blood work, updated imaging. The imaging was done on a newer machine than the one in our county, higher resolution, a different protocol. Thinking about nothing in particular, Dr. Vasquez called me that Friday evening, on my cell phone. Not through his office, he said, "Daniel, I need to ask you something. Have you done any other treatments since our last meeting? Anything outside of what we discussed? Any alternative therapies, supplements, anything?" I said no. I listed everything I was taking, everything I was doing. Nothing had changed. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The imaging from Thursday is significantly different from October. I've been looking at it for 2 hours. I wanted to call you myself before we schedule a follow-up, because I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly." I sat down on the stairs. "The tumor," he said, "has changed substantially. The active region appears to be, there's no other word for it, smaller, considerably smaller. And the surrounding tissue shows changes I am not able to fully account for given the current treatment protocol." I didn't say anything for a long time. He continued. He said it was too early to use the word regression. He said he needed another scan in 30 days to compare. He said he had sent the images to a colleague at Penn Medicine and would loop in Dr. Ellison. He said this kind of change was uncommon. I sat on those stairs for a very long time after we hung up. I want to be careful here. I am not a doctor. I am not a scientist. I am not going to claim to understand what was happening inside my brain or why. What I can tell you is what the subsequent scans showed over the following months: a continued, measurable, documented reduction in the active tumor mass. By June, the imaging showed changes that prompted a second opinion, then a third. Every radiologist who looked at the scans agreed that what they were seeing was real. None of them could fully explain it. The treatment protocol got credit. Dr. Vasquez believed the chemotherapy had finally reached an inflection point. though he acknowledged the timeline was unusual. The clinical trial drug was given credit. My own immune response was given credit. I accepted all of those explanations, and I still do. I don't need this to be a miracle in the supernatural sense. I don't need an explanation that goes beyond medicine. But here is the thing I keep coming back to. I have thought a lot about that weekend at the lake, about what happened to something inside me when we came around that last bend in the road, and I saw the water. About 3 nights of the best sleep I'd had in months. About the fire and my father across the room saying, "You look better," and meaning it. About Clara and her fishing rod and her 3 books and her professor the rabbit. About Renata knowing when to sit beside me and when to leave me alone. I have read about psychoneuroimmunology, about the documented connections between mental state and immune function. I have read about the effects of sleep and stress reduction on treatment outcomes. I have read careful peer-reviewed papers about the ways that hope, genuine, embodied cellular hope, can interact with the body's capacity to fight. I don't know what happened. I don't know if the lake had anything to do with it. Had any measurable effect on the cells in my brain. I don't know if the most important thing I did in those 14 months was comply with every element of the treatment protocol, or if it was asking to go back to the place where I had been most completely myself. Maybe it was all of it. Maybe it was none of it. What I know is this. Clara is 13 now. She has retired professor to a shelf in her room, which she claims is respectful rather than sentimental, and she recently told me, with tremendous authority, that she intends to become a marine biologist. I have every reason to believe she will. He called on a Tuesday evening, which is unusual. He's more of a Sunday caller. He didn't have a specific reason. We talked for an hour about nothing much, about the weather, about a book I'd been reading, about the fact that the old farm stand on the highway near us had finally reopened under new management. An hour of nothing in particular, which is everything. There was a pause on the line. I heard him do something that, from my father, is the equivalent of breaking down completely. He cleared his throat. Just once. "Good," he said. "I'll call the Browers." I don't know what saved me. I don't think I'm supposed to know. But I think about that last request, so simple, so specific, so particular to who I was before I was a patient, before I was a diagnosis, before I was a statistic, and I think it gave something back to me that the treatment alone could not give. It reminded me of who I was underneath the fear. And I'm going back to the lake.